shadow work is really just about exploration. It doesn't need to be more complicated. I think that sometimes people have an idea about shadow work that it has to be super complex, that you have to find some nuanced revelation about yourself or your trauma, or that there's a lot to do, a lot of processes to apply. But what I find is when people are really ready to do deep shadow work, it becomes rather instinctual, and it becomes simply about exploration. I think early on what happens is we can do some shadow work. We touch into the shadow in a very deep way for a brief period of time and then pop back out of it into like the identity structure or into coping mechanisms. But as we continue to do the work, we're able to stay down there longer. We're able to stay in the shadow space, or let's just say stay in the emotion body longer, and really explore and just see what's there. And of course, at first it's very intense, but over time, the intensity, you get used to the intensity and you realize you actually can handle it. You have the bandwidth for it. And then over time, the intensity does decrease. It's not so hot that you just can't stay there very long at all. Now it is valuable even early on when you're kind of going down deep, feeling that intensity and popping back out. It's still valuable to do that, but it can be, it can still leave quite a bit in shadow. So over time, it's important to learn that you actually have to go back several times to some things you have to visit, or maybe multiple times, and that you'll process it in layers. As you get into the deeper layers, you may be really surprised what you find. But again, it's just about exploration. So a willingness to explore, just to feel what's there, to feel all the emotions associated with your experience, with the moment, with maybe the trauma it's related to, and also willing to explore any beliefs around this. Like what are the identities and beliefs around these deep shadow places? Not to analyze, not to dispel or fix anything or heal anything specifically, really just to see it, to clarify what's happening. Because if I were to personify the shadow space, all it really wants to do is be seen. It wants to be known, understood, accepted, ultimately. But really you can't understand, accept, and hold space for something you just don't see, or that you're terrified of and you just avoid. So the first part really is the willingness to get down in there and just feel. And then it's about this exploration, which will be very natural. The exploration is not something you actually need a map for. There are maps for it, but it's something that at some point you will be doing rather intuitively. And you'll also intuitively learn which kinds of resources work for you. Maybe a certain person you're around that can hold space. It may be a certain modality, but the actuality of the shadow work itself is exploration, simple exploration, being willing to just remain in that space until you feel that something has completed itself for the moment. And then you'll feel like often a kind of release, and then you'll feel often very tired actually. And you'll need to process and integrate that over some time. By process and integrate, I just mean energetically. You don't need to do anything. You may not even be consciously aware of it. You'll just feel that there's this kind of release and a kind of exhaustion afterward, and it's time to rest. That's how the shadow work tends to play out when you go really deep. But once you're in that, once you're in that space, when you're down in that space, just be willing to explore. Look at all angles. Be willing to feel things that will surprise you about it. Be willing to see things that will surprise you. Be willing to do both shadow work and light work. You may be surprised that there's also availability to emotions and experiences that you've filtered out without realizing it, like joy, gratitude, and so forth. So have an open mind here. But again, as I said at the beginning, it's really about simple exploration, just being willing to stay in that space and feel what there is to feel, see what there is to see. It takes some time to actually get here. I find with people, it takes some time to get to the maturity of shadow work where You're not just like touching in and jumping back out and then going into the mind identified world that's like, oh, I did the work, or, I learned what I need to learn from that. And let me just move on. Let me just go on about my business of seeking and trying to make my life the way I want it and control, not realizing that all of that is still a reaction to the shadow you haven't fully processed. And so, yeah, it's a matter of keeping going back, watching these thoughts sometimes that say like, how many times do I have to do this? I've been here before. I hear that a lot. And it's like, well, you have to do it until you don't have the thought and belief you need to stop doing it, right? You have to do it until you're not so avoidant of it that all you want to do is get out. All you want to do is finish it. All you want to do is, so there's a bit of a catch-22 there, but the feeling like, how many times do I have to come back to this? Or I've already done this, or I don't want to go here. Why don't other people have to do this? Like, whatever it is. Those thoughts themselves are kind of a marker that you haven't really gotten comfortable with the discomfort of that space, or you haven't really learned that you have the bandwidth to just remain there and explore and see what's there, and that you have total capacity to do this yourself. Meaning relational work can be helpful, right? Therapy and trauma therapy and circling and PSIP, all these things, they can be helpful. But you always have to do the work in all these spaces. You still have to take it on yourself to be willing to explore. And if you're willing to stay and explore, you'll realize like you don't need to leave. There's nothing about the shadow space or the emotion body that says, I got to get out of here. I got to run from this. I got to get over this. I got to heal this and fix this. That's not really intrinsic to the experience. That's intrinsic to thought. So once you get past that and you're willing to actually just spend the time that you need to in that space, that's when the real transformation starts happening. So it's all about exploration.